I once did a high school media project on M. Night Shyamalan as a director, so naturally I feel like this is the right next step. M. Night Shyamalan movies are something I really felt like covering because they actually played quite a big part in why I enjoy movies today. He was the first director that I really became interested in, so it's too bad that we will be absolutely ripping some of these apart. Anyway, M. Night Shyamalan's a pretty famous director who you've probably heard of before. He established himself in the industry as a twist-ending master, I guess you could say. If you're not too aware of his style, most of his movies, or at least the most well-known ones, are usually quite dark in tone, with horror and thriller elements usually thrown in, and of course normally a crazy twist ending, and almost always a cameo from him as well, for some reason. Usually in very minor roles, but sometimes they can actually get a fair bit of screen time. Most people would also agree that he's often known for peaking early and only further decreasing in quality as time goes on. But yeah, he's a director with a surprising number of movies. Probably more than you'd think, actually. Some are good, most are bad, but all are interesting. Which is why I'm here today to rank every single one. And feel sorry for me because some of these are quite a chore to keep in mind that we're only doing movies that were directed by him. He was involved in some others, whether it be writing, producing, or just involved in some way. We're not doing those. Just the ones he directed. Alright, let's get started. Oh, and spoilers for all of these films, obviously. The Happening is a movie where apparently things happen. Because it's The Happening. This movie is genuinely regarded as one of the worst movies of all time, and watching it, it's pretty easy to see why. The Happening stars Mark Wahlberg as Elliot Moore, a high school science teacher who realizes that humanity has pissed off plants. That's right, the villain of this movie is plants. Plants apparently start releasing a toxin that makes people commit suicide, only stopping when enough people have been killed. I think it's never really explained. In fact, nothing in this movie is really explained. I guess it's sort of like a poor man's Bird Box, except unlike Bird Box, it forgot to at least be mildly interesting. The only redeeming quality of this movie is the score by James Newton Howard. It's genuinely really good, but the issue is that it's stuck inside whatever the hell this is. But to sum it all up, this is just one of those movies that makes me feel nothing. Its sole existence is to waste your time, and it doesn't even deserve any more mentioning. So I'm just gonna move on. Absolutely not, man. Why does this even exist? Why did he even direct this? I was wondering when this movie was going to start, and then it ended. After Earth is almost like someone watched every sci-fi movie and made sure to only take the worst out of everything they saw. 1,000 years after Earth became so fucked up that humans were forced to leave, Child Space Cadet Katai, played by Jaden Smith, and his super badass father Cyrus, played by Will Smith, crash land on Earth. But after Cypher injures himself straight away like a little bitch, it forces Katai to tread uncharted terrain to signal for help himself. While it's a very action-y sci-fi film, its main theme is a totally not overused, even for the time, sub-theme about a bond between father and son. And also the movie sucks. This is ultimately just a massive heap of sci-fi nothing. The main issue, I think, to the ultimate father-son theme of the film is that the characters are just kind of really unlikable. The dad just kind of acts like an uncaring asshole for most of the film. I get that his character is, the serious, gruff, strong, silent type, but they could have done it a lot better. And the kid is just kind of annoying at times too. He just comes off as a bit of a dog. People say that their acting's good, but I just don't care. It's so boring. And honestly, I don't even really necessarily agree with that. Will Smith and the support cast are decent, but Jaden, he's definitely still a bit lacking at times. Why even bother making this film have a father-son bond element if you're not even going to do anything with it? Is it because you were just super desperate for this film to have something of substance besides just action scenes? This movie does look pretty good, especially some of its effects. And I'm very well sure it looked good for the time back in 2013. But in this day and age, looking good is not enough. Having that be the only thing that's going for you just isn't going to cut it anymore. You can't just say, I don't need an engaging story, just look at my pretty effects. It also really doesn't help that a lot of this movie's colour is quite dark in tone. Obviously that's not inherently a bad thing, but in this movie in particular, where things are already quite boring, the dark colour theme is just the cherry on top of this bread sandwich. I don't know if this is bizarre to say, but honestly this movie kind of feels like some fucked up episode of like Animal Planet or something. Just someone walking through an uninhabited earth while someone else narrates over them for most of the movie. Look at all the nice wildlife around. I'm sure they're all super friendly and definitely not dangerous. I do kind of wish I had more to say, but this is just, again, one of those absolutely nothing movies. You know how people say that a bad movie is at least better than a boring movie? Because at least you can laugh and make fun of a bad movie. But a boring movie just completely empties your soul of will and emotion and happiness. And I do usually agree with that. I feel like so many sci-fi movies these days just think that as long as they look like eye candy, they don't really have to bother with making interesting characters or an interesting plot. But I really hate when they do that. Of course a sci-fi movie in this day and age should look like eye candy. But I feel like too many get caught up in making that such a priority that the rest of the movie just ends up suffering for it. And After Earth is kind of an example of that. It's just a messy hodgepodge of rushed sci-fi elements that tries to use the fact that it looks quite nice to cover up that the characters and plot are essentially non-existent. There's literally no reason to ever watch this movie, so just don't waste your time. I'm not gonna lie, it was tough getting through this one. Lady in the Water stars Paul Giamatti as Cleveland Heap, an apartment superintendent who discovers a girl in the pool, and it turns out that she's actually a magical creature from a different world who wants to return home. After Paul Giamatti discovers this woman in the pool, pretty much the entire start of this movie is just Paul Giamatti going around asking people about this woman that he rescued, and they'll tell him something along the lines of, she's a character from a bedtime story, and he'll be like, whoa, no way. M. Night actually gets a pretty decent cameo in this movie, playing one of the apartment tenants who's in the middle of writing a book, and his character is also kinda boring too. The dialogue is also just often not good. The dialogue takes itself way too seriously, while the rest of the film doesn't really do enough to bring justice to that dialogue. It tries to take itself seriously, while also trying to be a whimsical, fantastical, comedic adventure as well, and it really doesn't mix well. It advertises as a psychological thriller, but I wouldn't really say that it is. Like I mentioned before, it's more of a fantasy adventure film. The main message of the film, that everyone in the world has to be important in some way, is very on the nose. It's sort of beaten over your head right from the start of the film until you just sort of worn down enough to accept it. It picks up maybe a bit towards the end, where poor Giamatti has to figure out that some of the apartment tenants that were mentioned earlier are actually important to the main bedtime story that's trying to be told here. Even if it's still kind of a bit dumb and forced to me. Like, apparently if you just sit around all day doing nothing and say nothing of importance, then you might actually be the guild and an important character to a story. In that case, maybe I'm the guild to a story out there somewhere. Maybe you're the guild to a story out there somewhere. Maybe we're all the guild. This guy gets it. Honestly, the M. Night character actually kind of becomes the most important character by the end. They make out the film review tenant guy to be the villain, I guess, by being arrogant enough to assume the purpose of the tenants to the story, because he's like a film expert or something. But yeah, while he wasn't a particularly likable character throughout or anything, poor Giamatti is the one who approaches him and asks him who in the story is supposed to be who, so he just tells him what he thinks. But he presumably doesn't actually realize how real the situation actually is. To him, poor Giamatti just randomly shows up at his door and asks him about plots of fantasy stories. And he never even says he's definitely right either. Poor Giamatti just asks him, so he answers as best he can. Again, he's not a particularly likable character throughout or anything, but blaming him completely and having him get viciously killed by the monster maybe seems like a bit much. What else can I say? Everybody in the final party at the end just weirdly jumps on board with the story with no real explanation. I'm sure one of them says that they want to do it because he wants to believe that there's more to life than the terribleness that already exists. But that's not enough. It just feels like mindlessly going along with the plot just for the sake of progressing the story. The monster looks cool though. But anyway, I've actually seen some people say that they actually quite like this movie, which is interesting, because honestly, I don't really know what there is to like about this. Oh doozy, another bad one. Old is a movie about people who age rapidly on a beach. This movie introduces us to what I'll call the M. Night Shyamalan effect, where the idea for the movie is admittedly really cool, but the poor execution and script writing completely holds it back. Originally adapted from a graphic novel of all things, a group of people with different medical conditions are all lured onto a beach by a big scientific research company who are camouflaging as a luxury resort. They use the rapid aging effects of the beach in order to attempt to develop new cures for said conditions. Right from the start, the movie falls flat on its face. The entire main cast are complete cardboard and they are beyond forgettable. But where this movie really dies is the dialogue. For a specific example, this is what M. Night thought emotional dialogue in this movie should be. I could go on.
From her. I'm sorry. You have such a beautiful voice. I can't wait to hear it when you're older.
Surely dropping some serious foreshadowing along with that. But then towards the end when she does sing, it isn't even that good. Like, what the hell? In terms of positives, I like the imagery with the other mother character. The one with the muscle condition, I don't remember her name. I think she looks pretty cool. And there's a few mildly humorous moments sprinkled in there, like the sudden pregnancy moment. But the majority of it is just farting around until everybody except the two kids die. And the two kids, well, adults by the end of the movie, I guess, end up escaping through a secret coral tunnel because of a tip they received from an Indian kid they met at the resort earlier. Why is there a perfectly set up escape route off the beach? Only God knows. Anyway, this movie's not very good. And similarly to everyone in this movie, I also feel like I aged rapidly trying to get through this. M. Night's most recent film, released only around mid last year. Oh, that means M. Night can get his daughter involved now. A dad takes his daughter to a big cop concert with some pop star named Lady Raven, which is essentially a setup so M. Night's daughter can perform her songs. Where they soon realize though that something suspicious is afoot. Turns out the FBI headed by this old lady, have trapped everyone in the concert because they've received a tip that a killer known as the Butcher is in attendance at the concert. Compared to M. Night's other movies, this one is less about horror per se and is more just an action summer flick. Anyway, right from the start, they get right into it, but it's quite boring. A concert is admittedly an interesting base for the whole film, but the problem is that the music just doesn't do enough, man. If you're going to have a concert be your setting, I think the music has to really do that justice, but it doesn't here. The acting is also pretty bad, which is also one of the main criticisms of this movie that I've seen. However, because this movie is more of an action flick, there's less dialogue than usual. Which I mean, in a modern Shyamalan flick, that actually probably helps it. Some still sneaks in though. Most of this movie takes place in one area, which at first had me interested, because I do enjoy movies that mostly take place in one or very few locations, and we've seen time and time again that can be a very effective way of storytelling. I mean, there's countless examples we've seen time and time again that it can work really well, but here it doesn't, because nothing really happens. It's mostly just the main character, whose name is Cooper, slowly growing concerned about the FBI at the concert, and going out to check, then going back to his seat, then going back out again, then going back to his seat, and once again, it gets really boring in the middle. There is actually a twist at the end of this movie, although it's a pretty elementary one. It turns out that our main character, Cooper, is actually the Butcher. And that's why he was so concerned about the FBI raiding the concert. The twist is whatever. Even if you don't figure it out, it won't really surprise you. The added bit where the FBI old lady is actually Cooper's mother, I saw coming from an absolute mile away. So there's that. The ending after the twist is revealed is also a bunch of nothing too. Turns out his wife actually had suspicions of him before they even went to the concert, and she was the one who tipped off the feds that he'd be at the concert. He's about to extract some serious revenge on his wife when his house gets swatted. So he tries to escape, but they end up catching him. But then at the very end, he finds a way to unlock himself again, and then laughs maniacally at himself for a hot minute. And then that stupid post-credit scene comes out of nowhere, and it's not funny, and pretty much just ruins the tone completely. I get wanting to make a movie so your daughter can perform her songs, but why would you not try to at least make an actual movie around it? I suppose it would be best to just treat the movie like a summer action flick and, don't really pay attention to the small details. But it's honestly too boring to even look at from that perspective. So it ends up being too poorly thought out as a psychological thriller, but also too bland and boring to be looked at as a summer action flick. But you know what? At least as a casual action flick, there's definitely worse out there. This was M. Night's very first ever film, starring Mr. Cameo himself. Praying with Anger is a 1992 independent drama film where an alienated teenager of East Indian heritage is sent back to India, where he discovers his roots as well as a lot about himself. I really don't have a lot to say about this one, because it's just so boring, unfortunately. It was not very well received upon first release, and it's even quite difficult to even find nowadays. This was back before Shyamalan established himself as a twist master, so this movie doesn't even have any interesting twists for us to talk about. I guess unlike everything else below it, this movie doesn't actively make you hate it or anything. It's just, as I mentioned before, boring. It's fair enough to cut this film some slack though. It was his very first one, and it had a very limited budget to work around. So I guess you just have to accept it for what it is. His first film. Knock at the Cabin feels like another typical M. Night Shyamalan modern flick. Once again adapted from a book, two dads and their adopted daughter are vacationing at a remote cabin, where they're visited by four strangers who end up being the four horsemen of the apocalypse, by the way, who demand that one of them must sacrifice themselves, otherwise ruin will come for the world. They understandably refuse, but after they're shown previews of disaster upon the world, one of the dads decides that he will sacrifice himself, therefore saving the world. I suppose there are a few more positives this time around. Some of the acting is actually pretty decent this time. It's become common knowledge that whoever Dave Bautista's agent is, they are doing God's work at deciding what roles he should be casted for, because it just hits every time, and this is no exception. He fits in surprisingly well here, and it's actually not just him either. There's some other top performances sprinkled in too, most notably Ben Aldridge, who I think does a really solid job at bringing justice to the emotion of the film. Unfortunately though, this is about where the positives kinda end. Well, okay, I do actually quite like the very start of the movie. The opening scene does a good job at bringing tension and getting you invested right from the start, but it's kinda all downhill from there. The biggest issue is, and look, I'm not trying to throw extra shade about or anything, but the story that this movie's based off just doesn't seem like it's a great base. It's just kind of boring, overdrawn, and both overcomplicated, yet also not really explained enough. I haven't actually read the book though, so I'll give it the benefit of the doubt that maybe the book is more interesting than this film. But whatever, that's not what we're talking about. The other thing is that about halfway through, it becomes painfully obvious that this movie is just too long. You could probably tell this story in a short film, and it would probably be better, but instead, it's a 1 hour, 40-minute film, and boy does it show. So much of the middle of this film is not filler to say, but just so much unnecessary fighting around again. There's also a lot of repetitiveness too. Basically the whole middle of this movie is the four horsemen saying, "You have to sacrifice someone," and the parents saying, "No, we won't do something so egregious. You're obviously lying. Get out of our house." And then they show them a news report of a disaster happening in the world to show them proof that they have to do it, and the parents go, "No, surely it must be a coincidence, right? Right? Surely." And then this basically just repeats for like 75% of the movie until you're like, and then the ending? What did you expect a movie's ending to satisfy you? Who do you think you are, demanding something like that? Because after one of the dads sacrifices himself, the other dad and daughter go, "Oh, we saved the world, let's go." And then the movie ends. There isn't really a twist in this movie. That's like the one reason people still care about M. Night movies. It's just not here. The movie just laughs in the face of a psychological thriller, because it's anything but. Maybe a psychological thriller for snails. Now this movie did actually do pretty well box office wise, making over 50 million on a budget of 20 million. But considering that this film did actually release at cinemas, and I did actually see a decent amount of advertising for it, it's not too surprising. What did surprise me though was that apparently this movie actually received positive reviews. Maybe I'm missing something, but I'm really not too sure what people were really seeing here. I know for a fact that I saw a lot of negative reviews about this movie as well, so I'm really not too sure what's going on here. But oh well. Moral of the story is that this movie is again not very good. Oh boy, we get to talk about Glass. The much anticipated finish to the Unbreakable trilogy. Glass brings back all of your favorite characters from the Scooby Gang. David Dunn, Mr. Unbreakable himself, played by Bruce Willis, Kevin Wendell Crumb and his 32 other personalities, all played by James McAvoy, and Elijah Price, the super smart supervillain with extremely fragile bones, played of course by Samuel L. Jackson. This time, they've all been brought together by Dr. Ellie Staple, a psychiatrist who uses the three superheroes' weaknesses to detain them. She actually knows that they do have superhuman abilities, but believes that people with superpowers like that shouldn't exist, and makes it her task to convince them that it's all in their head, and they indeed do not have superpowers. Unfortunately for her though, Elijah and I guess the family members of the superheroes to an extent as well are planning an elaborate scheme to show the world that superheroes do indeed exist. And Elijah uses the help of Kevin's ultimate form, the Beast, in order to execute his devious plan. He turns the Beast against David, who fights it out in a big superhero fight scene that explodes out near the end, which ends with all the Scooby Gang dying, and Elijah seemingly having failed in his plan. In a totally shocking turn of events though, that's definitely not foreshadowed earlier in the movie, it turns out that the supervillain is always 3 steps ahead, and Elijah actually set up the secret camera footage in order to record everything that went down, with the 3 family members used to spread around to the world as proof of the existence of the Scooby Gang. This movie is so much worse than its 2 prequels. As seems to be becoming a pattern here, this movie sets up a really cool idea. The return of these legitimately kinda interesting characters who all had a past with each other, all together, and actually giving the Unbreakable series the conclusion it does deserve is really neat. But as we've seen before, it just sort of falls flat in execution. The acting is again pretty decent here. That's a given with a strong cast. However, it's not quite as noteworthy as the previous Unbreakable series movies. In fact, that's pretty much the theme of this movie. It just kind of makes you wish you were watching the prequel movies instead. These 3 main characters fit well into their original movies because all the attention was on them. So they got to be fleshed out and really analysed. But here, because they're all here, each one is weakened. There's too much going on and not enough time to really give each character a satisfying ending. Similarly, like most other modern Shyamalan movies, it just gets boring in the middle. The trailer scene where the psychiatrist is trying to convince the Scooby-Doo gang, okay, I'll stop calling them that now, they don't actually have superpowers and it's just in their head, it's just mind-melting. She's such a boring villain. Well, I suppose she's not really the villain, whatever. But she's such a boring character that you just feel nothing. For a superhero movie, there's also a surprising lack of action. Elijah and the Beast's escape from the prison is mostly just them walking down the hallway, occasionally running into a security guard and just having the Beast strangle them to death for like 5 seconds, and then they move on. Even the big fight scene at the end is quite tame. It's mostly just farting around again, someone runs at someone else, and then the police shows up, but they can't really do anything either. I'm not the biggest fan of lots of action in my movies or anything, but I'm just saying that you can't even really enjoy the movie from a fun, turn your brain off action perspective either. The way that the 3 superheroes end up dying, I think is kind of lame. Yeah, I know they all die because of their weaknesses. David gets drowned because his weakness is water. The Beast turns back to Kevin and then gets shot. Okay, but that one's pretty lame. And Elijah dies because of all his fragile ass bones get broken. I get they all died to their weaknesses, but it's still lame. Like David Dunn, the unbreakable man himself, who even in this movie is breaking doors down with his bare hands, dies because one person is drowning him in a little puddle of water. And again, you could argue that's the point, that it symbolizes that just like superheroes, as strong as they are, even a trace of their weakness will be devastating to them. But I don't know, man. The power levels just don't feel right. Especially since the person drowning him is just a normal human being. One other thing that also bothers me, and seemingly also others who watch this as well, is how much the Beast is sort of downplayed in this movie. In Split, The beast is built up as basically unstoppable, right? A super powerful monster who you were supposed to fear. But it turns out that if you flash light on it, it will change back to a different personality, which essentially allows the beast to be detained in a room so long as it has a source of light. Well, I guess they needed a way to detain the beast for the story of this movie to work. Anybody feel like this dramatically reduces the effect of the beast? It doesn't even matter if he comes out now, because just flashbang him and he'll just go away. Now this problem is somewhat alleviated at the end, I guess, where once the beast escapes out of the prison and into the sunlight, the flashing light no longer works on it anymore, and it's allowed to actually feel like a threat again. So at least there's that. But I still feel like the use of it at the start was lame, and honestly, they probably just shouldn't have added it. Would it really have been that different if the light was never introduced? They just had to try and detain the beast as best they could. No one would have... That not actually really changed anything story-wise, but it also would have actually still made the beast feel like a threat for the whole movie. But overall, the reason why this movie is above the others is because at the very least, I feel like it's at least watchable the whole way through. Albeit probably largely due to the fact that it really does ride the coattails of the two prequels and doesn't really do much to stand out on its own. But you know, the dialogue doesn't get as cringy as some of the other ones we've covered, and there's no terrible gaping plot holes or anything that take you right out of it. So we'll maintain a relatively low placement on this list. At least it's not as bad as the ones below, because that's how a list generally works, you goobers. You know what's scary? Old people, and having to visit them. Let's make a movie about that. The Visit is a 2015 film which stars Olivia de Jong and Ed Oxenbourne, Australian gang represent, as Becca and Tyler, who go on a visit to their grandparents' house, who they've never seen. But after a while, some strange shit starts happening with their grandparents. They start randomly attacking people, saying some kooky shit, and hanging someone in their backyard. But at least they're normal about getting Yahtzee. If you couldn't figure it out from that description, their mother hadn't actually seen the grandparents in a long time, because she got into a fight and she cut them off for like 15 years because of it, like a totally normal person. Honestly, the irresponsible parenting might be the scariest part of this entire film. Anyway, because of that, the kids had no idea what their grandparents actually look like, and it turns out that two escaped mental patients who were at the same hospital that their grandparents volunteered at murdered them and assumed their identities. Anyway, a lot of this film suffers from the same issues that we've already been through countless times, except the bad dialogue is now replaced with rapping, which is definitely even worse. The tension and supposed scariness often comes off as just kind of weird and gross. The main characters are boring and have cliche pointless backstories. A lot of bad going on here. I will give the film that the progression of the mental patients is fairly well paced actually. They sort of slowly start to fall apart more and more throughout the film. The build-up is decent. Although you probably wouldn't be shunned for questioning that two escaped mental patients did keep it surprisingly together for a while, and then sort of start to lose it quickly after that. But I'll take the movie side on this one. They were obviously still cognitive enough to create and execute their nefarious plan. But I think the movie does do a good job at establishing that they did show some cracks, even from the start. Very subtle, but they are there. There are still a lot of issues though. Like I mentioned before, the tension building is pretty much not there. There's an ongoing bit where the grandmother keeps asking the daughter if she can get down right in and clean the oven, which is obviously an attempt to try and build tension, but the whole thing is kind of pointless because it never really goes anywhere. Now the main reasons why this movie is above somebody else on this list is because I actually didn't see the twist at the end coming. Maybe I was just sleep deprived or something, but I actually didn't expect it. However, I still feel like it was a pretty predictable twist, and I bet most who watched probably did see it coming from a mile away. The actual ending is pretty mediocre. Their patients basically just completely fall apart at this point, and I guess they try to kill the children. I don't really know what they're doing actually, it's not really explained. But whatever. The granny becomes a literal monster, I guess, and a plot thread that's pushed throughout the movie is that Tyler is a germaphobe, and the grandpa rubs a diaper in his face. And that makes him so mad that he kills him. The kids get back home, surely needing a life's worth of therapy, but instead they just start rapping again. Brilliant. If there's one way to describe The Village, it would be that it's a movie that falters under the pressure that was put on it. See, after The Sixth Sense, Signs, and Unbreakable, the expectations for Shyamalan were very high. So there was a lot of pressure riding on The Village. So did it deliver? The critics fucking hated this movie. Although it did actually do fairly decent with audiences. And to this day, I'd say the reputation of this movie is actually fairly decent. It's actually not usually viewed as the downfall for M. Night. It's usually considered to be after this movie. Anyway, The Village is a movie about an isolated village, no duh, that lives in a pretty miserable fear of unknown monsters in the surrounding woods. But when one of the community members is badly injured, a blind girl sets out of the village to find help from beyond. First off, we're treated to an all-star cast here, with the likes of Bryce Dallas Howard, Joaquin Phoenix, William Hurt, Sigourney Weaver, and a very high-profile minor role support cast too, Judy Greer, Brendan Gleeson, damn. Anyway, I'll say that this movie has a really cool idea. Simplistic, sure, but still really cool. Unfortunately, the execution of this idea is better done than the things below this on the list. But there's still a few issues. The pacing is still a bit off. The beginning of this movie is agonizingly slow. It doesn't exactly leave a striking first expression. There's still a bit of NPC dialogue going on as well. I've seen a lot of people say that they like the little hints of romance in the movie, but honestly I don't really see that. Also, is this movie supposed to be scary? 'Cause I don't see it. All the moments that are supposed to be tense, I feel like just kind of aren't. And it's not because the movie's a bit older either, because I can respect the tense moments in some of the older movies, but just not here. The ending is also a bit of a mixed bag. A lot of things get thrown at you at the end, so I'm not going to go through it all. But basically it turns out that despite the fact that this is an old, isolated village, it's actually modern times. Turns out that Edward, one of the elders, founded the village way earlier. He recruited people he met at a grief counseling clinic to isolate themselves from societal violence, and that the monsters in the woods are actually just the elders dressed up. It's a nice twist, I guess, but feels a bit forced. It's not really paced the best. Yeah, I know, I'm being quite tough on this film, but it's an alright film. Probably the first movie where you wouldn't be embarrassed to say you would quite enjoy it. And it's absolutely much more worth checking out than anything else below it. Man, I did not have high expectations for Wide Awake, but I actually really enjoyed it. One of the lesser known Shyamalan flicks, it wasn't very popular at all. Wide Awake is about a kid, Joshua Beale, who after the death of his beloved grandfather is feeling quite lost and confused. So he decides to make it his new mission to find God. It sounds stupid, but it's actually not. By far the most important part of this movie is nailing the character of Joshua. As mentioned before, this movie is literally about him. He's the main man here. All of the movie revolves around him. So it's critical that he is a likable character. Without that, the movie just wouldn't work. And honestly, they nailed it. He's such a smart, witty fifth grader, but he's just such a Chad. He's so blunt and on the nose sometimes that it's kind of hilarious. But he's also likable. You can tell he's kind and he cares about people, and therefore you want to see him succeed on his quest. He's also extremely relatable. I don't know, man, just after all these movies we've gone through, it's just such a breath of fresh air to see an actual well-written character, dude. He actually legitimately feels like a fifth grader the whole way through. It helps that the acting is decent too, courtesy of Joseph Cross. It's not as good as some of the other child acting we'll get through later, but it's solid, and again, it really helps to bring the character to life. I also quite like the support cast too, featuring the likes of Dennis Leary and Rosie O'Donnell. I do especially like Rosie O'Donnell. The role honestly fits her perfectly. And correct me if I'm wrong, but is there no M. Night cameo in this movie? Maybe I just missed something, but I didn't see him? Which leads me to the next point. The movie actually kinda has humor. It's not laugh out loud or anything, but it's probably the only movie here where I actually kind of respect the humor. That's honestly a miracle at this point. I also really like how the setting for this movie is at a Catholic school. I like the juxtaposition between Joseph trying to find proof of a God despite the fact that he goes to a Catholic school. It's like they keep telling him about God, but he wants to go out and actually find it for himself. He actually wants proof about what he keeps hearing about. It also suits his character perfectly too. He has a very literal personality. He's very blunt. So again, it makes sense that he wants to see actual evidence of a divine presence. If I had to complain, I guess I'd say that maybe the slightly forced in side bits with some of the other students are probably a bit unnecessary. Like the bully who can't afford to go to the school, so Joshua feels bad, and then they get a nice send-off, I guess, but it's kind of a pointless ending scene. Yeah, that's pretty unnecessary. But it's whatever. It's not that bad. It's not like it takes you out of the movie or anything. Anyway, in the end, it seems like Joseph has all but failed on his quest to find divine presence. You do actually feel for him here. It does really seem like the death of his grandfather has really taken a toll on him. Anyway, on the last day of 5th grade, during a whole class photo session, the teacher asks if the class is missing someone. When Joseph sees the new quiet kid in the class out in the hallway, he goes to get him, only for the teacher to say that not to worry, because everyone is here. Yup, this was no normal quiet 5th grader. It was actually, or we can at least assume to be, an angel. He tells Joseph that there's no need to worry, because his grandfather is doing fine. Okay, look, is this ending a little forced? Yeah, maybe, but come on. I'd be lying if I said that I didn't at least get some satisfaction out of that. Just a feel-good ending, man. Just solid. Yeah, this movie doesn't have the most intriguing plot of all time. It's not a thriller action-adventure with horror at every turn and a crazy twist. But it doesn't need to be. At the end of the day, this is a coming-of-age movie. And very fortunately for the movie, I'm a sucker for a coming-of-age flick. It's just a solid, humorous, charming movie that feels very different compared to all of the other M. Night movies. It's kind of hard to believe that this is one of his films, actually. Seriously, I'd honestly recommend checking this movie out. And man, that speech that Joshua gives at the end about how much he has changed over the course of 5th grade, about how he was asleep before, but he's wide awake now. Man, I know it's another roll credits moment, but you know what? This time, I don't mind. Finally, this is where it really starts to get good. Quite late in the list. Reverend Graham Hess and his family move to a farmhouse where they start seeing signs in the cornfields.
Cornfields are awesome!
It might actually be aliens. First off, I'll say that this is the first movie on this list that you could actually make an argument for being actually scary. The tension building here is great. Where was this in some of the other movies? The aliens are purposefully never really shown throughout most of the movie, but the tension building is great. The scene at the birthday party where we get a slight look at the alien as it slowly passes by is great tension. I love that scene. And speaking of the aliens, I love their design here. They go for that design I like where, rather than being a stereotypical aliens that are, super smart and way more advanced than humans, the aliens are actually more akin to wild animals. But their designs look great. Anyway, getting onto the actual main humans in this movie, we're once again treated to an all-star cast. Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix again. That being said, the performances are good, but not remarkable or anything. There's also some very decent child acting here, courtesy of Macaulay Culkin's younger brother Rory Culkin and Abigail Breslin. A theme that will become a pattern as we get further up the list is good child acting, let me tell you that. Even the M. Night cameo in this movie is one of the better ones. It's actually one of the bigger ones. But his character is actually an important part of the story who helps move things along. The twist in this movie is that the aliens are actually weak to water, which is how they are defeated. It's a fine enough twist, but the thing is that the movie's message at the end of the day isn't even about the aliens. It's actually about restoring faith. See, throughout the movie, we're shown that after enduring hard times, losing his wife, having to deal with this whole alien threat, it makes Graham start to lose his faith in the world. However, by the end of the movie, them being able to defeat the aliens not only obviously ceases the alien threat, but also helps to restore Graham's faith in the world again. Maybe not fully, obviously, but it helps to set him on the right path. Again, it may sound a bit lame at first, but the progression of the storyline works really nicely here. If I had to find something to complain about, perhaps the start is a little slow, takes a bit of time to get into it, and similarly the middle can drag a bit. It's perhaps a little longer than it has to be. The baseball trauma dump subplot with Meryl probably isn't really needed, but it's not that big of a deal. Overall, this is a horror, thriller, tense movie, alien movie, but hidden underneath is a really clever sub-theme about restoring your faith. All hidden behind the mask of an alien horror movie. By far the highest ranked modern movie on this list, split release in 2016 and helped get Shyamalan back on the map. It didn't do amazing critically or anything, but it did alright. And yes, for a modern Shyamalan movie, doing okay is enough to get you back on the map. A man named Kevin Crumb with DID and 23 different personalities, due to his childhood and the abuse of his mother, kidnaps 3 teenage girls, who then must escape before his terrifying 24th personality comes to light. Right off the bat, easily the best part of this movie is the acting. I love James McAvoy, and his performance here really stands out. He gives justice to each personality, and each one is really allowed to stand out. I especially like the personalities of Hedwig and Patricia. Also, Anya Taylor-Joy as Casey is amazing here, as usual. Everyone else is really good too. The performances are obviously the best part. Outside of that though, I'll say that this movie captures your attention straight away and maintains it through quite an interesting story. Once again, the tension is done quite well here. All the different personalities are used in order to help build the tension of the situation, and there's no reliance really on jump scares or anything either. Okay, like maybe a bit, but like not that much. It's actually quite a simple movie, but it keeps you invested the whole time. A I've seen a lot of people who are not fans of this movie because of how it's not an accurate representation to actual DID, but I don't really agree with that. It's a fictional movie, telling a fictional story. It's not supposed to be exactly like real life. So I don't think you can really judge it too much by that, but I guess I understand where people are coming from. The movie also doesn't really get boring in the middle like most of these other ones that we've covered, because it actually feels well paced and spread the story throughout. Anyway, after a while of the girls not being able to succeed, Casey sometimes getting close but just not really being able to do it, Kevin's 24th personality finally comes out, which turns out to be a wild, superhuman creature called the Beast. The Beast kills the two other girls, leaving only Casey left. However, as the Beast has her cornered, it actually spares her. It turns out that the Beast only hurts people who haven't truly suffered, but due to Casey's rough childhood and history of self-harm, the Beast realizes that Casey has actually suffered. So he spares her, and she's able to escape. There's also a therapist movie that ends up dying at the end, but honestly I found that whole part kind of the most boring part of the movie. Anyway, we then get the reveal that this movie was actually a stealth sequel to Unbreakable, and the cameo of David Dunn at the end is a fun touch. This movie just gets a lot right. It's sort of one of those movies that you can really only watch once though, but I will say that it's a pretty good time for that one viewing. I'm not usually that big a fan of superhero movies, but Unbreakable is an exception. Right away, this movie throws you into the action. David Dunn, played by Bruce Willis, is on his way back to Philadelphia from New York after a failed job interview. However, his train is involved in a fatal accident, and everybody on the train dies except for David, who somehow is miraculously completely unharmed. This causes David to attract the interest of Elijah Price, aka Mr. Glass, played by Samuel L. Jackson. Elijah has a bone density condition. However, he believes that David is actually superhuman. As is standard for good M. Night movies, the acting is really good here. Bruce Willis gives one of his all-time best drama performances in a role that fits him like a shoe. And Mr. Glass is a fun character. His smarts and cunningness to get the info he needs is fun to watch play out, all portrayed wonderfully in a classic Samuel L. Jackson performance. David's son Joseph is also played really well by Spencer Tree Clark in more good child acting in M. Night movies. Where does he find these children, bro? Insane. The best thing about Unbreakable is its take on comic books and superheroes, because it's generally really interesting. It flips the script on the traditional superhero genre in a really clever way, and it still holds up to this day. I've also noticed that there's also quite a few long shots used throughout, even for things as simple as two characters talking. And it's small, but it really works quite nicely, and especially helps with really being engaged in these scenes. There's also quite a few scenes where the camera will zoom out slowly throughout the scene as well. I don't really have an opinion on that or anything, I just found it interesting since I feel like that's not really used too much in these other movies. I initially rolled my eyes at the scene where Joseph is about to shoot his dad to prove that he is unbreakable, but I don't know, they make it work. Also, the M. Night cameo in this movie kind of cracks me up, I don't know why. It's just some dude that David confronts at the stadium. And there's also some solid humor thrown in there too, of all things. The movie maybe goes a little far with the David linking to being a superhero. Don't get me wrong, most of it makes sense, but like, somehow his job as a security guard at a stadium protecting people somehow links to him being a superhero, I think is a little forced, but again, it's not that big of a deal. And a little twist at the end of the movie is that Elijah was the one who set up the train crash, as well as the other two terrorist incidents that I mentioned earlier, which is an awesome little twist and a good end to the movie. You could maybe make the argument that Elijah went too far in trying to find a superhero by literally killing hundreds of people, but yeah, he's set up well as a kind of supervillain who will do anything he needs to accomplish something, so long as he works out well. Everything's just better here. Even the score is decent. It doesn't stand out or anything, but it just helps elevate everything. He made some bangers back then, man. What else could really be number one? The Sixth Sense is incredible. It stars Bruce Willis as Malcolm Crowe, a child psychologist who is consulted by Cole Sear, played by Haley Joel Osment, a troubled child who can see and communicate with the dead. Where do I start with this? I guess we'll start as usual with the performances. And damn, what a standout. This is probably my favorite Bruce Willis performance ever. He really is so much more than an action star, and the emotional beats that his character hits really is the absolute best proof of that. And of course, Haley Joel Osment, who gives an Oscar-worthy performance in some of the best raw child acting we have ever seen. And Toni Collette, who plays Cole's mother, is fantastic as well. The pretty infamous scene with Cole, his mother, in the car is probably the best piece of raw acting ever. And not to mention that the scene is a brilliant emotional roller coaster as well. But this movie shines in even the smallest roles as well. Donnie Wahlberg, for example. He really commits to his small role of being the guy who shoots Malcolm at the start. And the dad watching the tape of his wife being the one who actually poisoned their daughter is a great performance too. This movie got absolutely snubbed at the Oscars, man. Anyway, right from the start, this movie sucks you in and keeps your attention for the entire runtime. This movie also succeeds in really applying some of those heebie-jeebies terrors. It's a bit more in-your-face and gory than some of the other ones we've covered, such as Signs, but it still works all the same, and it makes sense for the context of the movie. The effects also honestly still hold up fine to this day. The movie is also just really well paced, it follows a terrific natural progression. The Shyamalan cameo is only in the form of a minor character this time. He's only in one scene as a doctor / psychiatrist person. I also love the use of the color red in this movie to symbolize, well, the ending. But it's often used in super clever ways. But obviously, it's impossible to talk about this movie without mentioning the ending. And you know what? I'm still not going to. I know that this whole video has included spoiling the endings, but damn it, I ain't doing it this time. Chances are that if you're here though, you obviously already know the ending. It's just amazing, obviously. It's unexpected. I'm pretty sure most don't see it coming. I'm sure some clever people probably did catch on, but I'd still say that the majority probably didn't. But you know, what's almost as impressive to me is that despite how crazy of a shake-up the ending is, pretty much this entire movie remains airtight, while also being clever enough to leave you completely unexpected. It's pretty tough to find any plot holes or even just a single aha moment. Maybe there are some small ones, but I can't really think of any myself, so I think that's pretty impressive. It really does speak to good writing. To me at least, this is truly Shyamalan's magnum opus. It nails nearly everything. Terrific acting, great tension, genuine heart-crunching emotion, and the best twist ending ever. Again, it sometimes feels kind of crazy that this was a Shyamalan film, considering a lot of the other stuff we've seen today. Well, that certainly took a while. What did we learn today? Unfortunately, not much of value, it seems. Surely there's something. Sudden M. Night cameos can be a little scary. Twist endings are fun? Well, no duh. Everybody knows that. Well, I got nothing. I guess the takeaway here is that the quality differences between Shyamalan films is shockingly varied, and most of them aren't very good. But you know what? I guess that gives us all the more reason to cherish the ones that are great. Boy, I'm sure glad there's no M. Night cameo in this video.